Okay, that's the recording started. So Ewan, if you'd like to take it away.
Thanks. Yeah, first of all, thank you for inviting us along today, Caroline and Nathan. As Nathan was saying, my name is Ewan Purser, and I'm a tree health officer with the Scottish Tree Health team, and I cover mainly North Scotland. I'm going to try and give you an overview of who we are, what we do, and some examples of the main pests and diseases we deal with. Clari here, our policy advisor, is also going to talk a bit about ash dieback and some of our citizen science projects. So our main aims, what do we do? Protect our trees from harmful pests and diseases, monitor the health of our trees, and increase the awareness and understanding of tree health issues. How do we do it? So a lot of survey and monitoring work, remote survey, aerial survey, ground survey by ourselves, forest research and contractors. We have insect traps and water sampling stations for particular pests and diseases across the country. We also carry out some of the import inspection work at ports. Data, most of the data is collated and stored in GIS mapping databases. We've investigated almost 13,000 sites in Scotland over the past 9 years. Much of our work is in tandem with forest research. We have scientists at Roslin near Edinburgh and Alisalt in the south of England. Our teams are also sending hundreds of samples each year to them for laboratory analysis. We're hoping to start holding tree health events again next year, which combine field visits and conferences for the forestry sector and the general public. That's been put on hold a little bit, as like a lot of things, but we're hoping to get back to that. Citizen science has become increasingly important as a source of information to us. Clari will talk a bit about this later. And informing government policy, really important part of our work now, as there's such a focus on forestry and planting more trees at the moment. It's key we get the message across. There's not much point planting millions of trees if we're not going to be able to look after them. So our team, out in the field, we've got three tree health officers covering Scotland. I'm based in Inverness, covering Probin and Pitlochry North. Up until 2 years ago, it was north of Glasgow, but we have Jim covering central Scotland now and Daphne in the south. Most of the rest of the team are distributed across the country, but are based at our main office in Edinburgh. We've fortunately been able to expand our team more recently, 5 or 6 people up to the current 11 over the past few years, just to help us deal with the volume of work. Clari here, who's our policy advisor, could probably talk to you for quite some time about that side of things, but I'm going to stick more to the operational side of things today. It's worth noting too that we have a network of tree health champions distributed across Forestry and Land Scotland, so our sort of sister agency. Part of their job is dealing with any pest and disease related issues in the public forest and liaising with ourselves and the tree health team. So what are we dealing with? There just over 1,400 pests and diseases on the UK Plant Health Risk Register, and about half of these are forestry related. So these are pests and diseases that we consider a potential threat if they were to become established in the UK. You can see in this this graph how the number of pests we're dealing with at the moment, or have dealt with in the UK, has increased exponentially since the late 90s. So some of the notable ones are, 1960s, we had Dutch Elm disease come in. The 80s, the great spruce bark beetle munching its way north at the moment. We'll look at that one in a bit. In the 90s, Phytophthora olney, it's waterborne disease of alder. 2000s, Dothostroma needle blight or red band needle blight, a significant issue in our pine plantations. Pine tree lappet moth, an issue local to Inverness. We'll talk about that later. And then we had more Phytophthora diseases, Lawson cypress and juniper appearing. And then ash dieback arriving in 2012. We could add quite a few more to this list at the moment, but we'll talk about some of the new ones in a bit. So we'll talk a bit about Phytophthora ramorum first and larch. It's one of the diseases we have a statutory obligation to deal with, and we base our nationwide biannual forest survey on. So it was first found in Scotland, Scottish plant nurseries on rhododendron in 2002. In 2009, it was found in Japanese larch in southwest England, which was quite a shock to everybody, as it was quite a species jump for a disease. And then in 2010, it was found in western Scotland. We started our national surveys, and further infection was detected on Mull and in Dumfries and Galloway. You can see in those maps just about the first bit in Creignish, and then as it started appearing by 2013 and other spots. So ramorum is causing extensive damage and death to larch trees and some other trees and plants, and mainly in the wetter west of Scotland. It's known as sudden oak death in the United States, but fortunately doesn't appear to badly affect our own native oaks. So the disease is it's a fungus-like disease, and it sporulates in the needles of the trees. Spores are ideally spread in the wind and warm, moist air, can travel tens of kilometres in ideal conditions, but usually much shorter than that. While it can affect many species, the main host the disease can actually spread from are larch and rhododendron, our invasive rhododendron ponticum being particularly suitable for it. Unfortunately, it doesn't tend to kill ponticum. It just tends to sit and fester and cause some dieback and, of course, spread the disease. Apologies if there's any ponticum lovers out there. Since then, the disease has spread to a number of new, relatively localised sites across the country, with the exception of South and West Scotland, where particularly favourable weather conditions in 2012 led to quite a large surge in the scale and intensity of infection. This resulted in the designation of a management zone down in Galloway. I'll talk a bit about that in a minute. A further surge since 2018 has seen major areas of infection established northwest of Glasgow towards Oban and from Mull into Morven in the southwest Highlands. So you can see in those pictures there, there's if it's big enough, there's a well-infected larch tree gone completely brown, losing all its needles, and there's a bit of initial infection on the end of a branch, sort of yellowing needles. And that's quite typical what you see on a rhododendron bush, and sort of wilting tips with the leaves going brown. So the scale of the problem. This was a site in Galloway in 2012. The pale green trees, the larch trees, and I think it'll be Sitka spruce, the dark trees round about, all looking relatively fine in 2012. 1 year later, bang, most of the larch there is now dead or dying. Just going back and forth at that. That's 12 months. This is a site near Loch Lomond, just in 2020, just up above Helensburgh, I think is in the background there. If you zoom in there, you can see there's a little group, 3 or 4 trees that were found to be infected with ramorum, and 12 months later, the entire stand of larch had gone. That's how quick it happens in 12 months. Now, it shouldn't get to that stage now. This is what happens when nothing's done about the initial infection, but we'll look at what should happen to stop it in a little while. I'm just going to show a very quick animation, if I can get this to work. I'll probably mess things up badly here now, but we'll see if this works. I'm sure, Nathan, you can shout if this, does that appearing?
Not yet, no.
I'll come back. Oh, sorry. Share. That should be it now.
Yes, that's it now.
That's it. So this is just a time lapse. So from 2011, the initial infections in the west of Scotland, and then Mull, starting to appear in Galloway 2012, really kicking off in Galloway 2013. We're getting initial infections up in Aberdeenshire and in the West Highlands, but always consolidating in the south and west. And then by 2016, we're getting more infections in the east of Scotland and central Perthshire, more in the Highlands and Skye, but really consolidating all the time in the west and south, even up north of Inverness. To the point we're at now. So just to come back in there, I'll just start shading that again. Are we back?
Yeah, that's us back.
So it's important to say with that animation that it shows that the disease can crop up anywhere, but it doesn't necessarily establish in an area and start spreading exponentially. Most of those red dots, especially away from the west-southwest, are dealt with, and no subsequent infection occurs around the site. So you'll see that more clearly in a map I'll show in a minute. So we use climate modelling. It's helped us predict where the worst infections will occur and helps us prioritise surveys and actions. These maps show the average rainfall and location of larch, our larch forests. You can see that the areas of highest rainfall in the warmer, wetter west match up well with where we've had infection. But unfortunately, this is where a lot of the larch is. The areas of larch are actually exaggerated just so you can see them. But you can see that it's pretty well distributed across Scotland, but certainly more in the west. So what did we do about it, and what are we doing? So 2013, a management zone was identified in Galloway where the infection was the worst. We reckon there was about 70,000 hectares of larch in there, and about 80% of the stands were infected. So instead of infection meant statutory removal was not feasible. There wasn't enough machinery to get in there and deal with it, and the markets couldn't cope with that volume of timber. Voluntary removal was still encouraged. We still wanted to try and get rid of the risk. Biosecurity requirements still in place, so we still had movement licenses of moving infected timber, but there was no support measures or grants to help anybody trying to take these trees down. I was going to show a video about our survey, but we'll skip that for now. So our biannual aerial survey of the country, the surveys run from May to September, but essentially we're doing it twice. So we're using helicopter to fly the country in May, June time, and then again in August, September. The survey is all driven by Forestry Forestry, and it costs approximately 18 pence per hectare of conifer plantation. So you can see the kind of area we're covering with the flights. We varied the routes, so we're not covering exactly the same ground each time, but we reckon we're covering about 85% of the forest area each year. So we've got one person up front navigating and two people in the back photographing out of each side. So the areas larch blocks targeted, as are sites with known infections or infestations, could be other diseases and factors that make them a higher risk. We use filtered sunglasses, highlight the red and orange dead bits of trees, if you like, against a green backdrop really well. We can pick them up from quite a distance that way. Then the sites are mapped and work packages created for ground surveys. So this year, approximately 1,600 sites looked at in 2022 so far. Combination of species, mainly larch, 700 odd larch, 350 spruce, a lot of western hemlock this year. This is because there's a new disease appeared that we've been out surveying for, so it's a bit swayed that way. It wouldn't normally be looking at western hemlock that closely, but we're looking at other trees as well, other species that we pick up. Source of the sites mainly from the helicopter, from ourselves when we're out in the ground, also from owners, the public, Tree Alert, and FLS, Forestry and Land Scotland staff, or our own contractors, and then also if we're doing targeted species ground surveys, as I say, like the hemlock this year. You can see in that map all the blue dots, so they've all come back. That's not ramorum, but we've checked these sites, so you can see all the infection is still predominantly occurring in the south and west. So spotting the signs, this is typically what we see, not those awful photos you saw earlier down by Loch Lomond in Galloway. You probably, looking at first glance at these photos, wouldn't see anything, but if you were to look closely, you would pick up a little dead tree in amongst those larch trees there. There's a little dead top in here, quite a clearer dead top here going, and some side branches on this picture here. So we're usually picking up the disease in its early stages like this. This is when you want to catch it. So out in the field survey, when they get out in the ground, looking for evidence, there's bleeds, usually looking under the bark. There's needle loss, discoloured needles, retained needles in the winter, dark brown dead material where it should be creamy or green. You can just see under that flap of bark the dark material. But the disease does move really quickly, killing through the tree, killing it. So quite often we'll have to fell a tree because the disease quite often starts higher up. So to sample it, we need to take a tree or two down. Photographs, site symptoms are recorded. Lateral flow tests may be used. And and samples may be taken for laboratory confirmation. So yeah, lateral flow tests, we all know about these now. They've been used in plant health for years to detect Phytophthora in plants. Small amount of infected material is broken up in solution and then tested. You don't tend to get false positives with these, but there can be various reasons why they don't work properly. You know what everyone knows what they're like now. But you could get a false negative, so they can be a useful indication of the presence of Phytophthora and not definitive proof. That's why we use the lab for full analysis. Lab results of the samples can be really important evidence when working with landowners, as the implications of getting this disease can be huge, and it's important we have good evidence to support us. You can see the discoloured material under the bark on the left-hand picture next to the green and creamy coloured healthy material. So what happens if the lab says, yes, it is positive, or the site evidence is so overwhelming that we're confident to call it positive before lab results? The local Scottish Forestry Conservancy issue an SPHN, or a statutory plant health notice, requiring the owner to fell the infected larch and all further larch in a 250-metre buffer of those trees. So that yellow area, the initial infection has been found in odd trees around there. That's a 250-metre buffer around the infection. And these are the other areas of larch in that buffer that would need to come out under the health notice. The other species don't need to come out. But of course, if this was an intimately mixed site with larch and spruce, next to one another, it would be incredibly difficult to do, and it would sometimes makes more sense just to take everything out. But it's only the larch that's required. So potentially up to 19 hectares in that area would have to come out, but it's usually a lot less. So the actions required, usually felling, chemical kill and ring barking is quite unreliable, and it can be a health and safety hazard. It's still used in rare circumstances, difficult access sites, and around eagle nesting sites to avoid disturbance. We used it recently on Skye to retain standing trees around the nest site to retain cover and protection for longer. Legislation that says we have to fell or kill diseased trees doesn't necessarily trump legislation that protects eagle nesting sites. So we need to work with other agencies and organisations to achieve, the best outcome for everyone. Compliance states it's usually 3 months or before the next main spore release period, which happens in the spring and autumn. So SPHNs picked up in the May flight should be dealt with by September, and the ones SPHNs picked up in August flight will be by March the following year. This is key to slowing the spread of the disease and preventing new infections. We're not getting rid of this disease. We're only trying to manage it. Biosecurity, people and vehicles moving off the sites need to be cleaned, dirt and plant material removed, and disinfectant used. Movement licenses needs to go to a designated sawmill that's licensed to deal with infected material. Also, there's grant support might be available if the crop isn't commercially viable, too young, difficult to extract. So to summarise that one, end of May, helicopter flights, then analysis and mapping from all the photographs, then landowners need to be found, they need to be informed of ground survey, then surveyors go out, samples go to the lab analysis happens, the results come back to us, SPHN is issued to the landowner, who then has to organise getting the trees felled by September. So there's a lot to happen in a very short time when dealing with some of these statutory pests and diseases. People often ask us why we don't use drones. The answer is we do in limited circumstances, but just due to their capabilities. The high resolution, you can get them up quick, but they tend to cover quite small areas. They're all line of flight flying, so within 500 metres or so. So they're good for mapping a known infection, for landowners surveying their own forest. We could only do a very tiny bit of forest, each day with these. We've tried fixed wing aircraft as well, which fly up and down the country taking photographs. They're quite good resolution, but so they're good. They're good for mapping heavily infected areas because you can pick up groups of trees, but it's covering every inch of ground. So we would then have to actually go and sit down and look through every photograph of Scotland from these things. So it would be incredibly time. We couldn't get that done quick enough. Satellites as well. We've tried to use them. We do use them for some things, quite low resolution, so you could only pick up huge areas of infection, not trees or branches and things. They can take a long time to get images, you know, 2 weeks to 8 months. Cloud coverage is a big problem. Again, it's not targeted, images of everywhere. We have used them for compliance with statutory plant health notices because they can pick up large areas of felled trees. So we can have a look at this. These images, they're actually, it's not that clear, but they're a few months apart. And there's an area here, I think you can see, that's been felled, this brown area that hasn't been felled a few months before. So it's useful for keeping an eye on whether the SPHNs are being followed. So the helicopter, you know, high resolution, depends how much it's shaking. Get it up very quickly. You know, if the weather changes, we can get up and go and have a look. It is targeted, so we're only photographing those suspicious spikes. So, you know, we're doing part of the analysis in real time. There is issues. You know, we've got to get crew for this. I mean, they've got to be trained as well. So there are drawbacks with that. So let's go on to something else. Dendroctonus micans, the great spruce bark beetle. It's another threat we're managing at the moment, but dealing with it in a slightly different way. These beetles damage spruce trees by tunneling into the trees, laying their eggs under the bark, and the larvae feed on the outer woody layers. This weakens and kill the tree. The beetle and the larvae don't burrow right into the tree itself. The timber won't necessarily be spoiled if the wood is sort of salvaged before the tree is dead. The trees are actually killed by being girdled at various points along the stem. Could take several years of sustained attack, but these large sort of populations can be building up for a while, and then, you know, it creates the risk of spread onto nearby trees as well. So looking at the signs of this, you're looking for bleeds, but spruce trees bleed a lot. But the quite distinctive with these beetles is they tend to leave these holes in the tree with sap running out of them that look like little volcanoes. They're like little craters, and they tend to run up and down the tree and even down along the roots along the ground. So they're actually quite distinctive. So if you ever see anything like that, please let us know. The impact they've had, so this was a site in Galloway. It did also have drainage issues, so the trees were already under some stress. You can see a lot of dead and dying spruce in that picture. The beetles sort of can be attracted to the pheromones of stressed trees, so and the sap pressure tends to be less. They can get in easier as well. So this is what can happen if they're left to it. What are we doing about it? Very few pests we have a biological control for, but this is one of them. Rhizophagus grandis is a natural predator of Dendroctonus micans. So these beetles feed exclusively on the eggs and larvae of the D. micans beetles and can home in on their prey with superb accuracy. Forest research actually breeds these up in their labs, feed them on cat food, and they're released in batches near new infestations. So they're released within a kilometre or so of D. micans infestations in batches of about 50, and they stop the D. micans populations from reaching levels where they're doing serious damage to the trees, but they don't wipe them out, of course, because they wouldn't have anything to eat. So we've got something called the pest-free area in the west of Scotland, and this allows trade with Ireland in timber. An establishment of this beetle in that area would result in loss of trade. And the problem is that although the impact is being managed, they're still spreading north. They do like the warmer temperatures for breeding, so climate change might accelerate this. You can see the purple dots is where we found them at the moment, and that's the green pest-free area in the west of Scotland. So it's not that far away. The pest-free area is monitored continuously as evidence of free from a number of bark-boring beetles, including this one. And this is done with pheromone traps and billet pile, small piles of logs. At one point, 70% of the timber in this area was actually going to Ireland. So if these pests are found in there, the implications can be quite big. Another beetle looks similar to D. micans, and this loves eating larch trees, poor larch trees. It's interesting because it shows the knock-on effect of one disease to another. So until 2020, we were only really aware of this beetle in the south of Scotland, where we monitored it because of the large amounts of stressed and dying trees available to it. I'm worried that the numbers could go up to such an extent that they would move on to healthy larch, but we hadn't observed it doing any damage. So we didn't expect to see this in Perthshire, where there have been relatively few outbreaks of ramorum, resulting in these stressed and dying trees. But those pictures, all these trees have been killed by the beetle. So it's an area just south of Dromochter, north of the A9. The red areas where larch was removed in 2018, 2019 under a statutory plant health notice for ramorum, around 250 hectares. And the yellow areas are where we found dead and dying trees in the subsequent years, 2020, 2021. So all around the edges of the felled and removed larch areas. And we initially thought this was caused by ramorum infection, but it would have been unusual. Normally it's quite effective, the SPHNs, and all our tests for ramorum are coming back negative. So in closer inspection, we found the tops of the trees riddled with these insect holes and galleries. So we had, ended up with a couple of hundred dead trees on site. But you can see on the picture with the trunk there's little piles of sawdust where the beetle has been going in and out. They're called little frass piles, and you can see the distinctive galleries under the bark in the top right picture. We've got a central breeding chamber and the larvae moving off at right angles to feed. So we wanted to find out if there were more of these beetles around than we thought and do some intensive monitoring. So last year we put up traps with a new very specific pheromone lure for this beetle. We found it was quite widespread in very small numbers across the country, but not in the pest-free area. So until this year, where we concentrated our traps in and around the pest-free area, and we have now picked it up at 3 locations in the pest-free area. Again, it was only a very small number of beetles, and we didn't find any evidence of damage to trees or breeding. But after discussions with Ireland, we've now halted movement of larch across the water. So a very small amount of larch goes to Ireland anyway. So the impact wasn't huge with that, but hopefully at the very least we may have prevented a new pest from establishing over there. Again, warmer summers and milder winters may allow populations to increase and in the future, so we're going to keep an eye on this one. Pine tree lappet moth. So this is something quite local to the Inverness area. Caterpillars of this moth are, don't know what happened there. Sorry. The caterpillars of this moth are a serious pest of Scots pine across Europe. Oh, what have I done here? Have I put on some dictation thing? Do you know how to turn that off, Nathan?
No, I'm not sure. I don't know what you've done.
Hang on. I don't know how you do that. Subtitle settings. Stop subtitles. I found it. It's fine. It's always an option there. Sorry. So yeah, the caterpillars of this moth are a serious pest of Scots pine across Europe actually, but was not known to be present in the UK until a small breeding population was discovered in 2008 near Beaulieu in the pine forest. Moths lay their eggs up in the canopy and the pine needles. Then the caterpillars come out, eat the needles, march down the tree to hide in the ground for the winter, then march back up the tree, eat more needles and pupate into moths. They can build up huge populations in the right conditions and completely defoliate trees. That picture on the right there is on one of the Swedish islands, and completely defoliated the pine trees there. And we're of course concerned about our Caledonian pine forest and the impact it could have on that. So at this point, we're unable to tell whether it's a native and very small breeding population or it's been introduced relatively recently. And again, concerned with climate change, the warmer summers could allow larger populations to build up. So the map on the left shows the breeding population we found them breeding there. So it extends a little bit up towards Cannock and Phytophthora, but around the Beaulieu-Cartarlity area. So as a precaution, we've been closely monitoring the population levels using pheromone traps and glue banding of trees in the infected areas. The pheromone traps, these, you see them, the triangular traps, attract the male moths onto a sticky pad, and the glue bands trap the caterpillars as they go up and down the tree. And we've got a large network of traps set up across the north. And forest researchers are looking at ways to potentially control population outbreaks of this, with things like breeding disruption, by confusing the males with fake female pheromones. We've got traps set up in forests as far as Tentsmuir, Denby Dundee, and also down the Speyside, but we haven't picked them up anywhere else. So we're still looking for evidence of natural predators to the moth being present here, like there is on the continent, like parasitoid wasps, which can help naturally control populations, and this might also indicate whether the moth is native or introduced. Another local one, everyone will probably be aware of, Dutch Elm disease. It's probably one most visible to people in the Moray Firth area over the past few years. It's been around in the UK since the 60s, but it's taken until recently to reach us in the Highlands. It's a devastating fungal disease that affects the ability of the tree to transport water and nutrients, and what appears to be a healthy tree early in the spring can be completely dead by the summer. Infection is usually spread by a beetle that burrows and breeds under the bark, leaving the trunk peppered with shotgun. You can see the shotgun-like holes on this middle picture, and beautiful fan-shaped galleries. You see that on the right-hand picture under the bark. So that's a picture of dead elms just north of Dingwall. It probably happened over as little as 3 years, just one after the other, bang, bang, bang. There have been scenes like this all over the Inner Moray Firth area recently. Drummond Rocket was particularly badly hit, you might have noticed when you're driving through. It's really unfortunate to be encountering this in the Highlands at the moment, just as our ash is coming under increasing pressure from ash dieback. It's both trees being especially obvious in our agricultural landscape along fields and roads tend to be the diseases that most people are aware of. We're still monitoring the extent of infections. This was the extent of the disease up until recently, but unfortunately we've now found it over in Lale Forest near Ullapool and in gardens around Ullapool, and it's been spreading further in Speyside. The beetles don't actually fly very far, usually tree to tree, but one of the main culprits for the enhanced spread of the disease is transportation of infected firewood. We recommend that any affected elm trees are chopped down and burnt in and around the properties they came from. It's particularly important in the west. Even though it's usually fatal to mature trees, elm will regrow from the base of a dead tree until it reaches a certain diameter, and you can find that the beetles go back in again. But you can still find younger elm going along roadsides and field boundaries where the large trees have gone. We'd still like to encourage regeneration where possible, as this can only help to improve the genetic diversity and the possibility of more resistant trees. I'm interested to hear if any other organisations here have been doing any work with elm in their woodlands. Probably running a bit short on time here. Very quickly, another one, Phytophthora pluvialis, a disease we found recently, just this year on the west coast of Scotland, affecting western hemlock and Douglas fir, but it's known to cause dieback in radioactive pine in New Zealand. It only previously been found in New Zealand and North America, and this was all new to us last year, in the last year, beginning of this year. But we're worried about our Scots pine could be affected. So forest research at the moment are currently infecting lots of different species to see how vulnerable they are, including Scots pine. So we're watching that one quite closely. On the horizon at the moment, say beyond the horizon, because that's where we want them to stay. Some of the pests we're particularly worried about due to the potential impact they would have if they became established here. Most of these pests and diseases we looked at, today, the climate change will play an important part in their ability to survive and thrive in Scotland. But first one, emerald ash borer, it's currently spreading west through Europe. We import a lot of firewood from there at the moment. It's quite frightening, even at Inverness Harbour. Some of not Inverness Harbour, but some of the East Coast ports. Some of the hardwood that's coming in from the far end of Europe, and our ash is particularly vulnerable, of course, at the moment. Xylella fastidiosa, a bacterial disease that can affect a wide range of plants and trees. It's been causing huge damage to olive groves in the Mediterranean. It's difficult to detect, as symptoms can be hard to distinguish from less serious problems. Ips topographus, another bark beetle, another one. In population outbreaks, it's causing huge damage to spruce forests as close as France and has now been found in South England. It's suspected to be moving across the channel when numbers are high. Our colleagues in England are currently carrying out a huge survey and eradication programme. Big implications if it got up here into our big spruce forests. Finally, bronze birch borer. It's native to North America. Risk of accidental introduction through the plant trade. Current control strategy, if found breeding, could include clear felling of birch around 10 to 20 kilometres from the infection. So the implications of that are huge. Don't want it here. It's worth saying we work closely with our colleagues in the UK Plant Health that carry out much of the import inspection work at ports and other points of entry. You can imagine it's incredibly important work monitoring this, what could be key points of entry for many of these things at the moment. And very quickly, biosecurity, can't stress the importance of this enough. One thing that may have come from the pandemic is people realise how easy it is to spread disease, and it happens in the environment too. It's really simple. When you go out for a walk in the forest or woodland, make sure your shoes and boots are clean and you don't take it back out with you. It doesn't have to be a massive deal, just brushing the dirt and debris off your footwear and washing off with a squirty bottle or something. You don't need disinfectants and things unless you're like us working on infected sites and high-risk sites. Anyway, I've probably blathered on enough. I'll hand over to Clari now. If I stop sharing.
Yeah, if you stop and I'll start. Just 1 second, folks. Can everyone see that? Okay, great.
Yeah, we can. Yeah.
So hello everybody. For those that don't know me, I'm Clari Burrell and I'm Tree Health Policy Advisor for Scottish Forestry. You can hearing Ewan speak there, Ewan from our ops team who does all the hard work. I'll rattle through this just quickly as I think we need to leave some time for questions. I basically just wanted to give a very quick update on where we are with ash dieback because it's now quite widespread across Highland region as well. So it's been here, the fungus that causes it has been here for at least 10 years. Some evidence to show it might have been here earlier. But basically the progression has been an attempt to eradicate it in the very early stages, but it being capable of being carried on the wind, fungal spores moving from tree to tree, and that's how the infection can spread. It's incredibly hard to contain it, and it is now widespread across the whole country. We found in the last 2 to 3 years that we're seeing more mature trees showing quite heavy symptoms. So, you know, a very reduced canopy when it should be nice and green in the spring. So basically, based on the evidence that we have from Europe, what we know from England and what we're beginning to see here, we think that at least 50 to 70%, 75% of ash trees are likely to die over the next 10 to 20 years. It's very hard to make definite predictions, but that is the closest that we can get at the moment, the best information that we can give at the moment based on what we've seen elsewhere and based on some computer modelling predictions and stuff like that. But predicting localized rates of decline is even harder because there's lots of environmental factors that can affect quite how rapidly a tree succumbs to this. And ash can, in some cases, go on for years and years and years with some infection. But then in other cases, we see quite rapid decline. So because it's widespread across the country now, people are having to make management decisions about how to deal with this disease. One of the major things that needs to be based on tree context. So ash is obviously a native species. There's a huge amount of biodiversity supported by it. It's a very important tree in ecosystems in Scotland. So we want to try and keep ash as long as we can, wherever we can. But in some cases, ash can get brittle as it declines due to the disease, and it can be infected by secondary infections, for example, with armillaria. So if you've got trees in a context like beside a busy road, your management decisions are really different to if you've got trees in a woodland area away from major public access. And in those cases, there's a lot to be said for leaving it for as long as we can, encouraging natural regeneration. A small amount of ash will have natural tolerance to the disease. So what I wanted just to show here really, as we don't have time to cover ash dieback in all its detail, is just where you can get more information. So this guide from the Tree Council, I put all the hyperlinks in full so that people can get them afterwards and go and do their own reading. But this one is very good for everyone. If you've just got trees in your garden, if you've not got much experience of this is a really good starting point. Or then say particularly for big organisations like councils, local authorities, you know, potentially big landowners, this toolkit is very useful because it lays out how to prepare an ash dieback action plan, because this is a disease that we're living with. It's widespread now. It's not going, we can't eradicate it. So it's a question of how do we live with it and manage it and minimize its impact on our landscapes as much as possible, and how do we look forward towards recovery, eventual recovery. And for those that want a lot of detail and get into the really, you know, a long and detailed techie kind of guide, if you're managing your own woodlands, for example, these guides from Scottish Forestry contain a lot of information, and particularly the Woodland Management Guide has a lot on different sort of soils and woodland types in Scotland, particularly native woodlands, and different species that can fulfill some of the things that ash fulfills in the ecosystem. So that's worth a look. I also just wanted to quickly mention the Living Ash Project, which is moving on to a bit of a more citizen science aspect. Living Ash Project, there is a lot of work going on, not just in the UK, on trying to find trees that might be tolerant, and trying to understand the genetics of them to hopefully eventually breed tolerant, disease-resistant ash. The Living Ash Project is a project involving several different organisations, and you can, if you know of or come across trees, ash trees, particularly in woodlands, I think what they're particularly interested in is trees that are looking healthy and full canopied, even when trees in the vicinity are not. If you notice that over a long period of time, if you notice when you go for a walk in your woodlands that, you know, you're seeing ash trees that really don't look like they're declining like you might see the rest, then you can report it to the Living Ash Project. They'd be interested to hear about it. And for other tree pests and diseases, Ewan was talking a lot earlier about all the surveys that we do, but if you yourselves in the course of your work or in the course of your leisure suspect that you might have found a tree pest or disease, if you see evidence of it, you can report it through Forest Research's Tree Alert portal, and that reports it to the Tree Health Diagnostic and Advisory Service. So that's a really useful service for reporting anything you think might be up. The earlier we catch things, the better. And I just wanted to quickly mention Observatory, which is a citizen science project. It's UK-wide. Scottish Government supports it along with a lot of other organisations and the other governments. Some of you might even be Observatory volunteers. I'm not sure. But it's a great project. It's basically trains up citizen scientists to go and survey and to learn to spot tree diseases, acting as an early warning system. And I would say, even if you're not thinking of becoming an observatory volunteer, they have a number of free resources on their website, and you can order copies of the field guides. And for anyone that's interested in tree pests and diseases, particularly across a broader range of species than perhaps we've talked about here today, then they really are very good. So I'd recommend them. I'll finish up there because we need some time for questions, but thank you very much. I'll leave it on. That's our details.
Thank you very much, Ewan and Clari. Excuse me. Yeah, so any questions, as I said, put them in the meeting chat, or you can raise a virtual hand and we'll come to you as well. But yeah, I just had I was curious, do bark beetle, the spruce bark beetles you were talking about, Ewan, do they affect all species of spruce, or is it specific species of spruce? Try saying that fast. Yeah.
Yeah. It is Sitka and Norway. I mean, of course, that's what we've mainly got anyway. So that's where we've seen them causing problems, but both those species can be affected.
Okay. Hebe had a question about the eagle nest mitigation you mentioned. Could you elaborate a little bit on that, please?
Yeah, so I think it's just saying that obviously we don't want to disturb eagle nesting sites, so clear felling or felling a tree with a nest in it is not going to be a particularly good idea. But as I say, even felling trees round about it can have an impact on the site. So we've done our best where we've been in those situations to retain trees. I think with eagles as well, they have a number of sites quite often, so they may move on one year, may not be the next year, but we would look at just minimizing the impact by retaining trees round about, keeping cover there, and letting the trees decline more slowly, rather than the shock of removing everything round about.
Okay, thank you. We've got a couple of questions about biosecurity. So, excuse me, Rose Scott's asking that, saying, as an island nation, we seem to have been remarkably lax about biosecurity in the past. Is this changing? And is it a case that people who are making the laws don't really understand the problem? Do we need more scientists in government?
I could probably take that one. I think that in the past, if you're saying that biosecurity has been a problem in the past, I mean, I think that that's certainly true. I would say that things are improving, but that it's always a tricky one, because it's a question of having to justify why you would ban trade of a particular material. So for ash, there's restrictions on anywhere where the emerald borer that Ewan was mentioning has known to be found, then you can restrict. But what's difficult is to restrict trade without a justifiable reason. So it's always that balance. It's trying to find the right balance. But I think I would say it is a lot better than it used to be. I mean, it would be ideal just to sort of ban everything completely, but that's not going to go down. So it's a constant search for the right balance, is what I'd say.
So what you're saying is it's as important to identify those risks on the horizon as it is to actually have the restrictions at the ports.
Absolutely. Yeah. And there's a constant process of that. There's a constant horizon scanning and risk assessment process that then feeds into the sort of top level UK-wide plant health governance group. If something is on the horizon, a pest risk analysis will be done. We've got a plant health risk register. So there is a constant and organised process of trying to mitigate that risk. If something, for example, shows up in a European country that there are no restrictions on at present, that could be done as a legislative process. You can put blocks in it to say this risk is now increased, so therefore it can change as the risks change. But the risk is that the pest moves faster than the process keeps up. So it's a bit of a constant ongoing process. Yeah.
I know we've got a few sort of site managers or woodland managers on here as well, and I'd be interested in any of their experiences in managing sites with tree disease. So yeah, if anybody's got any experiences they want to share, please stick a hand up and I'll bring you into the chat. I'm not just saying that because I've noticed Ross Watson from Woodland Trust is right in the middle of my screen at the moment. I promise, Ross, I'm not picking on you.
Throw me under the bus, Nathan. Thanks very much. Well, that's a couple of things, I suppose, Nathan. And firstly, you mentioned about elm. One of the sites to look after in the north of Skye. We've got some wych elm where we collect the seed and then grow on just off site and then plant the wych elm back in. So it's just a very small scale thing we're doing with elm. But more largely on the site that Nathan and I worked on previously, Urquhart Bay in Drum, where ash is just keeling over.
Yeah.
And we only found it there in 2019, and it's how quickly in these much damper, humid areas where how quickly ash dieback has come in. But at what point we begin to think about that living ash project and how long do we wait before we start to see some of the trees are doing better than others, but I'd say 80% of the ash in there is looking pretty sick. And did we say, well, it's ash dieback's been in there for 3 years that we know of? Do we start to go through there and try and find some of the better trees at that point, or are we too early yet?
With ash, it's probably a little bit early. I mean, they're very early stages. It's always it tends to be the regeneration, the really young stuff that gets hit, and it can happen quite quickly with that, and it sort of comes and goes depending on how bad a season it's been. And I guess what we're talking about, is over the much more over the longer term, because it takes such a while for it's constant reinfection that happens with Clari ash dieback of a tree. It's constantly getting hit, and it'll be over time whether it shows that resistance. Certainly, probably a little bit early after 2 or 3 years, but it's worth keeping it. It's worth keeping an eye on, because if you're keeping an eye on it now, you'll maybe continue to keep an eye on it.
Aye. So for my colleagues who are further south in Perthshire and beyond, is the length of time for infection sufficient now for them to begin to think about logging trees within that project?
Absolutely, yeah, definitely. Once it gets into the big mature trees, that's when we'll see how long they're going to last, I suppose.
Okay.
Yeah, definitely.
Grant, excellent, thank you.
Thanks, Ross. Do we have any other questions or any other comments on managers? Ian, yes, do you want to come in?
Thank you, Nathan. Ross, you were mentioning about felling. I really have to flag up my involvement in tree health is really to do with SPHNs, but also felling permission applications. Just be aware that there's no real felling permission exemption for ash dieback. So really have a word with your local woodland officer if you're planning any felling. There is some good guidance. In fact, I've got it open in front of me if anybody's going to ask any nasty questions. There are quite a few exemptions to felling permissions, but they are quite exacting. For example, we mentioned Dutch Elm. You don't need a felling permission application or felling permission where greater part of the crown is dead. So I think the Dutch Elm is one of the disease exceptions where you don't need an felling permission application and FPA. But if in doubt, please contact your local conservancy office, I think is the message. Right, thank you.
Thanks, Ian. Okay, well, if there's no further questions, I can't see anything further in the chat. I know, Rob, you'd asked a question about biosecurity. I think that was covered in the discussion, but if you don't feel it was, then stick up your hand and let me know and we can talk a bit more about it. But barring any further questions, I'll maybe just say thank you very much to Clari and to Ewan and to Ian as well for fielding some questions and for the presentations. Been very interesting, very helpful. And yeah, we will Caroline will make the recording of this available to HEF members. If there's any questions that come up after this that you think of that you wish you'd asked, by all means get in touch, or get in touch with Ian or Ewan or Clari. I'm sure they'd be happy to speak to you about any of these issues. And yeah, we'll hopefully see you all at the next HEF event. Thanks very much.
Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
everybody.